Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where today we're going to be tackling the very serious side of cybercrime. Because did you know there have been a fundamental restructuring of cybercrime cartels thanks to the booming dark web economy of scale? Powerful cybercriminal groups now operate like multinational corporations and are relied upon by traditional crime syndicates to carry out their illegal activities, such as extortion and money laundering. But cybercrime cartels are also more organised than ever before and are enjoying greater protection and resources from the nation states that view them as national assets and celebrate them. So after reading more about this in a recent report by VMware, I reached out to them and invited them on the podcast to discuss some of the insights in that report. And thankfully, Tom Kellerman, Head of Cybersecurity Strategy for VMware, kindly agreed to join us today. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Denver, Colorado, where you can join me and Tom Kellerman as we talk about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Happy to. Thank you for having me. My name is Tom Kellerman. I'm the Head of Cybersecurity Strategy for VMware. Previously, I was the Chief Cybersecurity Officer for Carbon Black, and 23 years in cybersecurity. I'm passionate about defending against the worst of the worst, the cybercrime cartels and the advanced persistent threat actors associated with the intelligence communities of the rogue nation states of the world.
And there's so much I'm excited to chat with you about today, because I think there has been a fundamental restructuring of cybercrime cartels thanks to a booming dark web economy at scale. So just to set the scene, can you expand on how powerful cybercriminal groups are now, and especially as they operate like almost multinational corporations and more organised than ever before? But can you offer an overview and set the scene?
Yes, so everything changed in 2013 when Vladimir Putin called upon General Gerasimov, who runs the military of Russia, to create a plan to get revenge against the West post-Glasnost. And Gerasimov gave a famous speech at a Black Sea resort overlooking Crimea, stating that the West had two Achilles heels. It was the dependence on public opinion to substantiate institutions, and secondarily, it was the dependence on technology. Knowing full well that they themselves, the GRU and FSB, couldn't go toe-to-toe with the NSA or Silicon Valley or the Five Eyes, they realized that they had this resource. They had these assets. They had these cyber criminals that had been hacking banks since 1995 that could be called upon to be patriotic. And in exchange for their services, they would receive untouchable status from Western law enforcement. So everything changed there. But then it changed again, essentially during the pandemic, because the lockdowns inhibited traditional organized crime syndicates from their conspiracies writ large, right? Because they were locked down. And so many of those groups began to migrate online and do things like become affiliates for ransomware cartels, launder money online, and essentially making the cybercrime cartels that much more powerful. And then lastly, you have this realization that because of all the money being spent by governments to buttress their economies during the pandemic, much of that was stolen by these very cybercrime cartels. According to the World Economic Forum, the dark web economy of scale is about $1.5 trillion a year. And the majority of those proceeds are pumped back into Eastern European, Russian-speaking cybercrime cartels.
Wow, some frightening stats there. And one of the reasons I invited you on here was after reading a report by VMware that revealed that VMware's that revealed that 63% of financial institutions experienced an increase in destructive attacks, and even more so, 74% of financial security leaders experienced one or more ransomware attacks in the past year alone. So, can you tell me more about the increasing attacks on in particular, financial institutions?
I would be happy to. And yet previously, about 20 years ago, I was the head of cybersecurity for the World Bank and IMF. And I'm very passionate about understanding what challenges the financial institutions face, because typically they have the most investment in cybersecurity compared to other industries. That being said, the cybercrime cartels in their Pax Mafioso with the intelligence services of 4 rogue nation states, are pillaging these financial institutions for the purposes of offsetting economic sanctions, obviously, and to make themselves wealthy. And they're doing so in a myriad of ways. But let's talk about destructive attacks first. Destructive attacks are increasing for 2 reasons. One is geopolitical tension, right? Banks that have abided by sanctions, who have essentially frozen assets of oligarchs, et cetera, have been targeted with destructive attacks. You also have the realization that adversaries now, cyber criminals, when they hack a financial institution, when they realize the defenders are onto them, when they realize that their command and control is being disrupted and their secret passageways are being shut down, they become punitive and visceral in their reaction. And many times they'll drop wipers or ransomware, not Petya style, where they don't ask for ransom, just to cripple the institution as punishment for reacting to them, because their long-term goal is to maintain persistence in that infrastructure. Per the ransomware epidemic, look, the majority of institutions have suffered from ransomware attacks, approximately 2 a year. The fact that they're paying ransom is highly problematic because it becomes a self-fulfilling vicious cycle. And realistically, I think what the regulators need to do at a minimum is ban the insurers for covering ransomware payments. Because many times institutions, they have the cybersecurity cover and they'll just lean on their insurer to pay. Some insurers, like Lloyd's of London, have decided they're not going to pay for ransomware, nor will they pay for the aftermath of nation state or acts of war in cyberspace. And we're seeing a lot of that right now due to the war in Ukraine.
When you looked through that report, were there any other big stats that really stood out to you?
Yes. When you think about how cybercrime and cybercriminal conspiracies are changing, they're moving away from just wire transfer fraud or brokerage fraud, which is still increasing, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But the elite cybercrime cartels are conducting digital front running or digital insider trading when they're stealing non-public market information from institutions and acting on it in the markets. Everything from market strategies for where will this bank place their bets on international currency exchanges this fall, to this bank is part of a large merger that's ongoing that isn't public. We know about it, and we can play off of that information as well. And those types of criminal conspiracies are directly benefiting sanctioned financial institutions across 4 rogue nation states that we all know who they are. In addition, you're seeing more and more adversaries leveraging Chronos attacks on the value of time. They do this primarily for the purposes of obfuscating when they've been in a system. They're like deleting the logs. It's almost like akin to deleting camera footage, right? Or changing the times associated with footage from CCTV when you rob a physical bank. But some of them are actually manipulating the value of time associated with trades or positions taken in the markets. And one of the challenges we face as a Western society is our dependence on time. And the fact that cyber criminals and cyber spies now understand that dependence and can manipulate the value of time, particularly when they go after the backups of organizations, is highly problematic. And then last point here, as we're all moving to artificial intelligence, every company is producing artificial intelligence, governments et al., we have to understand that the greatest vulnerabilities of artificial intelligence are twofold. One is the dependence on time, right? Yeah. And the other is really the integrity of data that's being essentially ingressed for the purposes of manifesting that singularity. And so when you look at the long-term projection for destructive attacks and integrity attacks and this manipulation of time, we just need to appreciate that there exists this true protection racket and Pax Mafiosa between, for example, Russian intelligence services and the greatest cybercrime cartels. And European and Western law enforcement and British law enforcement will never be able to truly arrest these individuals unless they're stupid enough to come vacation in an extradition-friendly country.
And you're someone that's passionate about this space and monitors everything closely and works very close to the trends in the area as well. So I'm curious, was there anything in the report that surprised you, or have you seen and heard it all before?
No, I mean, things are progressing in a downward spiral. 23 years in cybersecurity, I've never seen it getting this badly. I did find it interesting, the attacks on time and the dramatic increase of attacks, obviously against non-public market information and the theft of that. API attacks. 94% of financial institutions noted that the APIs that they were building out or were being built for them, right, for the purposes of fintech and access to virtual currencies, et cetera, they were being used as a vector of attack into the organization and a vector of spread to target their constituency via island hopping. 94%. Much more needs to be done vis-a-vis API security and application security writ large. And I think we've been so focused as a defender community for years on the construct of perimeter defense and defending against things like spear phishing. And I would say this, what we learned from the pandemic, what we learned from the shift of these adversaries is that perimeter defense is dead. They will at some point get in. And when they get in, can you suppress them and ensure that the two worst case scenarios don't happen? One is the hostage situation, right, where they cripple the organization and they use the infrastructure to target the constituency. And the other is the destructive attack. And so you're really trying to prevent the modern bank heist from becoming a hostage situation. And that should be the goal of defenders and IT professionals, because all of the digital transformation, and yes, VMware has a large stake in that renaissance, all of that digital transformation, if not done in a vigilant fashion, creates a panacea for fraud and attacks.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little research. I also read that traditional crime syndicates have become almost loyal dark web customers because of that well-funded ecosystem of ready-made and available ransomware kits. Terrifying to read about, but can you expand on that too?
Yeah, and we need to appreciate that, everyone from the Japanese Yakuza to the Chinese triads to the narco traffickers of the world to the Russian mafia, very organized, sophisticated, powerful entities, right? They are understanding the utility of technology, and they began to understand the utility of technology a long time ago vis-a-vis just the purposes of counterintelligence, right? Counterintelligence against law enforcement efforts, et cetera, et cetera. And then they began to realize, that money is digital after 1995. We can launder money through this. So then you see this widespread adoption of virtual currencies by these groups, et cetera. And now they realize, hey, not only can we make money as affiliates for ransomware services, et cetera, but more importantly, we can launch hybrid attacks against organizations, whether it's targeted assassinations where you hack the cell phone of your target and they beacon locations so you know when the motorcyclist should come by and kill the person, all the way through hacking local police, crippling their infrastructure when you're about to conduct a massive, heist or something so that they don't have the capacity to respond, like inhibiting 911 here in the US, or hacking databases of people in jails such that their release date was moved up. All of these things have happened. And it's just people aren't speaking about it. And I know it sounds ridiculous. This is not make-believe anymore. It's all very possible, even though those traditional criminal syndicates that are legendary, that we all know of, may or may not have the technical savoir-faire to do these attacks. They can outsource to a cyber criminal that's willing to do it, or they can lean on a cyber criminal cartel partner to effectuate these realities.
And I'm conscious for everybody listening, we're painting quite a scary picture here. So what can security teams and C-suite, etc., what can they be doing to better protect their business?
So just in terms of information sharing, they should engage with local and federal or national law enforcement organizations that are ready to share information, ready to help you when the inevitable does happen. So whether it's in the cyber fraud task forces of the Secret Service that also exist in the UK and London, by the way, and the information sharing there, or whether it's through local information sharing bodies, get involved, immediately get a point of contact both on the local level and the federal or national level for cybercrime when the inevitable does happen. Number two, you need situational awareness. You need greater visibility. So make sure your network detection response systems are integrated with your endpoint detection response systems. Number three, really focus on API security and application security, given where attacks are going. Spear phishing is a problem, but it's not the primary vector of infiltration anymore. It's really all about application attacks now. In addition to that, expand threat hunting across your infrastructure to include the C-suite, to include the executives and their assistants' laptops, which has always been taboo, but you need to understand any sort of behavioral anomalies that may manifest there. And then finally, workload security. As you're migrating to different types of cloud environments, in fact, most organizations use multiple clouds, you need to be able to consistently protect and manage the security of those workloads in those environments. So all of that. And then finally, look, you have to become a better advocate, a better public speaker, a better translator for your bosses, such that eventually when you translate the real risk here of the inevitability of the digital transformation being hijacked, that they empower you such that you're no longer reporting to the CIO or you're equal to the CIO. And for the CIOs out there, yes, you should empower your CISOs. You need that defensive coordinator. You must respect their opinion, but also so that you get the resources and the capacity to say no. Like, no. Yes, it's amazing we're building that new application, but have we tested it against the OWASP vulnerabilities? We have, and these were found? Fine. Then we're not going to go to production yet. We can't go to production yet because it can be polluted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm conscious that we will have a lot of VMware customers listening as well, and they're going to be looking to you guys for that help and support. So how are VMware directly addressing these new wave of attacks too?
Well, VMware, we understand that, we are a significant target for the most elite espionage threat actors and cybercrime cartels of the world. And they have a desire to turn us into solar winds. And we've been fighting that from happening. And we've been successful thus far in that regard. We have committed to cybersecurity by joining things like the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, by collaborating more with the Five Eyes, to all the way through making cybersecurity a priority for all of our products through rugged coding, to really embracing this mindset of zero trust and intrusion suppression within our own infrastructure. But most importantly, I would say this: we are customer zero for our security portfolio of products. We are using the same products that our salespeople might try to be selling to you. We're using them. We've integrated them. We're using them at scale, and we're constantly refining them based on our own experience with them. And so please understand that we believe in vigilant digital transformation, and we are committed to protecting our ecosystem and our customers in that regard.
And what's next for you guys at VMware? Where do you go from here? And what makes you more hopeful about the future? Because again, we've painted quite a bleak picture, but there is a lot of great work going on, and there's a lot to be hopeful for, isn't there?
There is. First of all, there's unprecedented information sharing and collaboration occurring between the tech sector, the security sector, and the governments, the Five Eyes, to really disrupt and suppress the actions and activities of these cybercrime cartels. So I'm heartened by that. Technologically, moving and progressing with the advancement of the capacity for workload security, number one. Number two is making sure that modern applications can be secured. And number three, really understanding that the future of cybersecurity is inherent to the fact that the infrastructure must defend itself in real time, unbeknownst to the adversary. So not only are we manifesting that within our own infrastructure, but we're really laser focused on this construct of an open XDR, an open extended detection response capability set that allows you to have true ground truth across your entire infrastructure, from workload to the network to the endpoint, and understanding from that how that telemetry can be used to hunt an adversary unbeknownst to the adversary. Remember, you have home field advantage. Okay, yes, they will get in, but then again, they're in your house. You know your house better than they do. And so your capacity to have that house defend itself in real time to prevent that home invasion is something that we're attempting to enable now.
Fantastic advice. And I always like to leave everyone listening on an inspirational note. So I'm going to ask you to leave all the listeners with a favorite book, or a book that has inspired you throughout your career, that we can add to our Amazon wish list, that listeners can check out. So is that a book that you would leave everyone with?
Yes, the book, it's part of a series by Pierce Brown called Red Rising. Red Rising is an amazing series that I first came across when a friend of mine who worked for the intelligence community told me that it was mandatory reading material for all CIA case officers. And I said, why? And they said, well, it's based on the future. It's science fiction. It's about an insurgency in space. I've never read something of such high quality with such great character development since The Lord of Rings. And I highly recommend it to everyone. This series will blow your mind. In fact, I feel like I should be doing marketing for this author, how much I love this series. But more importantly, the threat hunting community that was created by Carbon Black when they pioneered EDR, the majority of those folks that are trained on cyber threat hunting have read these books. So it's become almost a subculture within the threat hunting community writ large.
Wow, incredibly cool. I'll get that added straight to the Amazon wish list for people to check out. And I do invite anyone listening to tell me what they think of that too. And I'm conscious the VMware website is a huge site and we've covered a lot of information in a short amount of time. Is there any way you'd point everyone listening to keep up to speed with the latest information and contact your team, etc.?
Yeah, the TAU, TAU, just type in TAU. It's a threat analysis unit. It's not only the telemetry and the cybercrime and spy conspiracies that we see targeting our infrastructure. It's also specific to what we see, where we've been deployed to defend, as well as the threat hunting community writ large that we arm and enable on a daily basis. So just type in TAU and you'll get most recent threat reports, trainings, video commentaries, and even things like sock puppets that you can enable to defend your infrastructure against significant organized threats of today.
Awesome. Well, I'll have that link to the show notes so people can find that nice and easily too. And like I said, we've covered a lot of ground there, talking about cybercrime cartels, how they're more organised than ever before and enjoy greater protection and resources from nation states that almost view them as national assets. Some of it's very worrying, but there is a lot to be hopeful for. And a big thank you for sharing that with me today, Tom.
Thank you so very much for having me.
I think one of the reasons that traditional crime syndicates have become loyal dark web customers is because of the well-funded ecosystem of ready-made and available ransomware kits. And as Tom discussed there, cybercrime cartels such as the Conti ransomware gang have made it as easy as possible for their associates to launch ransomware attacks on critical industries such as the financial sector. But you've heard from me today, you've heard from Tom and some of the insights from that VMware report, but what are your experiences? Do you have any insights or things that you'd like to highlight? You can do that by simply emailing me, techblogrwriter@outlook.com, or send me a quick DM on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. And equally, if you'd like to come on the podcast and present a different side of the story, we can do that too. So please keep those messages coming in and I'll return again tomorrow and we'll explore another topic together. But more than anything, just thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.